Hello, I'm talking to you. This is Goddess of Science Biology, and I'm Mrs. Bolden. Today we're going to talk a little bit about evolution. Section 15.1 is what we're going to concentrate on today. Darwin's theory of natural selection. The main idea is Charles Darwin developed a theory of evolution based on natural selection. Okay, so for a long time before Darwin ever came along, in the mid 1800s, scientists knew from fossils that they had found that life doesn't stay the same on Earth. They looked at a cliff. At the bottom of the cliff, there were some fossils that they found. In the middle of the cliff, they found some different fossils, similar to the ones at the bottom, but definitely different. And at the top of the cliff, they found some new fossils that weren't similar at all to the ones at the bottom of the cliff. So they knew that life was changing on Earth. There are lots and lots of explanations because that's what scientists do. They try to explain whatever they're looking at. And one of the early scientists in the late 1700s was Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, French dude. And there he is, right there. Looking a little like worse for wear there. Looks like he could eat maybe a wee bit more, but maybe not. He said that adaptations are acquired through use during lifetime get passed on to the offspring. Okay, so it's an okay theory. He didn't, he looked at the evidence that he had and he came up with a hypothesis. And so this is kind of the evidence that he used. He said originally they found fossils of giraffes that had really short necks, more like a horse than a giraffe. And during a time in the environment when they were going through many years of drought, the low grass and small shrubs didn't really have the root structure to be able to survive that. So most of the food for the giraffes were at the tops of the trees or on larger trees. So they had to reach their neck out to get to the leaves on the trees. And by doing that, that actually stretched their necks. So originally, they were these short little kind of long-necked horse things. And then because this giraffe was able to stretch and reach those taller leaves, then they used their neck in a different way. And the inheritance, because these guys had longer necks and were able to survive, they're the ones that were able to pass on their long neck trait to their offspring. So during the lifetime of these giraffes, their neck lengthened and Lamarck said that trait got passed on. Here's a problem. Maybe that was good for that time, but if you think about this a little bit more, using 21st century hindsight, if you had two accident victims that both had one arm, they were having children, their children would have two arms, obviously, because the long neck trait of the giraffe was not in the way that Lamarck was thinking about. It was not in the genetics of the organism. It would be the same thing if a bodybuilder, had worked really hard and got really big muscles, decided to have a child. The child wouldn't be born with really huge muscles because they hadn't worked during their lifetime. It was not a genetic trait. So that kind of puts the kibosh on Lamarck's theory. But back in Lamarck's time, people didn't know about genetics. They didn't understand that. So we can't be too harsh with him. Charles Darwin comes along. He's the evolution dude. This is young Charles Darwin. Charles Darwin was a very interesting person. He was kind of growing up and coming into his adulthood in the 1830s. And he came from a really wealthy, noble class. His mother was part of the Wedgwood family in England. They were a very famous family. They were a very wealthy family. Their claim to fame was Wedgwood. They made Wedgwood china, which is still considered like the gold standard of china in the world today. They still sell Wedgwood china. So his mom was from there. His dad was Darwin, of course, and he was a very, very famous physician in England at the time. As a matter of fact, his father was the physician to the Queen, Queen Victoria, at that time. So Darwin, being a young person, decided that he wanted to go to school to be a doctor because he saw, his father and wanted to grow up to be just like his dad. Unfortunately, when he got to medical school, he realized that he didn't really like to be around sick people, and he definitely didn't like to be around blood. So, as many people do when they go to college, the first thing that they go for is not necessarily what they graduate with. So he changed to theology, and theology is a study of God, and usually if you're going to study theology, your idea is you're going to be a minister or a priest at some point in your future. So he changed to theology, and all was good, not a lot of, blood there. So when he finally got done his schooling, there were, much like today, there aren't a lot of jobs for certain majors, so he had to wait to get a parish where he could be a minister. So his father was like, all right, fine, but you're not going to hang around the house forever. So you got to get some sort of job. You're laying around the house for too long. So go out and find a job. So his dad says, you need to do something while you're waiting. You need to start earning some money of your own. And his uncle sent him an ad that was placed in a London paper that was for work on a ship mapping the coast of South America. Back then, they didn't have, Google Maps or anything like that. And mapping was really done. It was a very intensive thing. And the only way to map something is to go there. So the British Navy would send out these ships, and they would have to go along the coast of places and map what they saw, what they observed. Darwin wasn't going to be a mapping person. What Darwin was going to do is he was supposed to be the assistant to the naturalist. Now, a naturalist was kind of a weird position back then. Well, it would seem weird to us. It wasn't weird back then. It was kind of a combination of a geologist and a biologist kind of together. A naturalist collected rocks and samples, and back then, because people didn't travel more than 10 miles away from their house in their entire lifetime, they were very, very interested in faraway places. So one of the things that the mission was going to do, this primary mission, was to map the coast, but they also wanted to collect some specimens from that coast that they were mapping. So he got the job, and the ship that he was going to work on was the HMS Beagle. Now, history has recorded that Darwin was actually the naturalist on the ship, but he actually wasn't. Back in the day, it was very much a class system in Europe, especially in England. People of the upper class, if you were noble of birth, you did not socialize with people of the non-noble people. So the captain of the ship, the HMS Beagle, was of the noble class, and most of the workers, if not all of the workers on the ship, were not of the noble class. So the ship was going to be gone for quite a while, and the captain wanted somebody of the noble class to eat with him. So he placed the ad for the assistant to the naturalist. Really what Darwin was the captain's buddy that he ate with. And Darwin was very well read. He was very educated. He was very personable. He could carry on conversations with just about anybody. So the captain really liked him, and so he hired him. Even though he was the assistant to the naturalist, his primary job was just to eat with the captain and socialize with the captain. So he was really just the captain's buddy. Here's the thing. Because this was just kind of a social position, Darwin really wanted to he really wanted to be a naturalist. He was a collector from way back. He had a whole rock collection and all kinds of different things that he would find. He would collect, and he was a little bit of a pack rat. Maybe an episode of 18th century hoarders would have been kind of his thing. But because there was no money really for paying for an assistant to the naturalist's supplies, he actually had to pay for all the supplies that he needed. So he had to go to his dad and say, Dad, I'm not really getting paid for this job, and I want to collect all this stuff, so can you keep giving me my allowance? And Darwin's father, listening to this, like, first he was going to be a doctor, and then he changed his major, and then he had to wait for a parish, and now he's going to do this thing, and now his father has to pay him his allowance still, even though he's working, to be able to get this kid out of the house. Darwin's father said, fine, I'll continue paying your allowance as long as when you get back to port in a couple of years, you'll get a job. And Darwin says, of course, I still want to do that, no problem. So they went off on a sea voyage, which was fraught with peril at the time, to South America. All along the way, they would stop someplace, or they were in the ocean and there was like some dead fish that was floating there, and Darwin would be like, oh, pick that up, I want to save that, I want to see what, and he was constantly collecting stuff. Once he got over to South America, he started collecting rocks and other organisms and birds and stuff. I can't even imagine what it was like to be this guy's roommate. It must have been his room must have been chock full of crap. So when they finally get to South America, the guy that actually got paid to be the naturalist decided that he just wanted to stay there and paint pictures. So he left the crew, and so Darwin got promoted to being the actual naturalist on the Beagle. So one of the cool things that happened was he kept a journal of his trip, and he also kept very, very detailed records of the specimens, where he found them, what kind of environments they were in, what they were eating, all kinds of very, very detailed records. So he collected, as you might imagine, tons of specimens, and they couldn't keep them on the ship because there was only limited room. So Darwin would ship those home to his father. Case after case after case of rocks and dead birds, preserved in stuff, and bottles of this and that and the other. So collected tons and tons of specimens, sent them home to his dad. His dad was running out of room, and he's like, Darwin, you can't send any more of this crap home. It's filling up the dining room. So what he did is he started sending them to a friend of his at Cambridge University, which is a very famous university in England. So eventually they get around to the other side of South America, the west coast of South America, and they stop at this group of islands called the Galapagos Islands. So Galapagos Islands actually belong to Ecuador. They're about 800 miles out into the ocean, but they still belong to Ecuador. If you want to go to the Galapagos Islands today, you actually have to apply to go there, because there aren't any hotels there. If you want to go, you have to charter a boat to go out there. You have to join a boat charter to get out there, and you have to apply to the country of Ecuador to be able to go. Back then, not so much. So they get over to the Galapagos Islands, which are off the coast of Ecuador in South America. And Darwin finds all of these different organisms. They're so interesting to him, but two organisms actually helped him much later with this theory. He didn't see the tortoises of the Galapagos and say, hey, evolution by natural selection. That's not really how it happened. The giant tortoises of Galapagos Island were very, very important to him developing his theory. Whenever they came into port, he would hop off the boat, jump on the dock, and chat up whatever natives were there. And one of the places that they stopped, they had all of these tortoise shells all lined up in a row. And there's our Galapagos tortoise. In this picture, you can't even really tell how big it is, but it's probably like maybe half the size of a Volkswagen Bug. They're pretty big. Anyway, so he hopped off the dock, started chatting up the natives, and he says, wow, look at all these shells. They're all very different. And the guy that was on the dock says, oh, yeah, you can tell which island each tortoise came from because they have different shells. Some of the shells are short and flat, some are tall and more rounded, all different characteristics depending upon which island they came from. So Darwin said, how about that? And went on his merry way. So different shells, different environments that they came from. Tiny little piece in Darwin's theory. The other organism that really helped Darwin kind of cement his theory of evolution by natural selections were these finches that he found on the Galapagos. There were 30 different varieties of finches. Finches are like little songbirds, and they have, the finches of the Galapagos are actually rather famous, and they have different beaks based on the food that they're going to eat. Some of them are insect, they're long and skinny so they can get into little holes and get insects. Some of them are for cracking seeds. Some of them are for picking up insects, all different kinds of beaks, all on this small chain of islands. So Darwin continued around the world. And as a matter of fact, he actually went around the whole world, and instead of being gone 2 years like he told his father, he was actually gone longer than that. So this is Darwin's journey. So he started here in Europe, went over here, bing, 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 bounced up and down the coast of South America, eventually come over here to the Galapagos, came around to New Zealand, Australia, over here to the tip of Africa, back to South America, and then eventually back to Europe. So eventually he gets back to England. And he said, he has a reunion with his dad. He says, Dad, you know what? I don't want to be a minister anymore. Now I want to be a scientist. I have all this stuff and I think I'd be really good at it. And his father's like, fine, you want to be a scientist? That's fine. You've been to school, you have a degree in theology, I'm not paying you to go back to school. And Darwin's like, no, I think I'm good at this. I don't think I need to go back to school. His father says, that's fine, but I am done supporting you. You are officially cut off there, buddy. Darwin also got married. Kind of a strange thing. He got married to his eighth cousin or something like that. They had lots and lots of children. They got busy. And he needed a way to support his family. So he took his journal that he had kept on his trip around the world and he published it. And the good thing about Darwin's journal was he didn't write as a scientist. He really wrote as a person, just for the general public. And that journal was an instant hit because at the time people were very, very interested in faraway lands, and they would buy books by people that had been to faraway lands. So this little journal that he kept, called The Voyage of the Beagle, became a bestseller, and it actually helped to pay for his scientific career, which is great. So now Charles Darwin is set up. He's got his family going. He's got his science going. Had lots and lots of children. And he published many, many scientific papers. He became amazingly popular and amazingly respected in the scientific community because his papers were well written, they were meticulous, he had lots and lots of data, and he published a lot of scientific papers, none of which were about evolution. So he became kind of a big deal in science. Not kind of, he was kind of a rock star in science at that time. That's it for this time. Next time we'll continue talking about Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection in part 2. Thanks for joining me today.